Well, lesson 49 is on Masada. Do you guys know where Masada is? Well, I'll give you a clue. Dead Sea, remember the Dead Sea? Yeah, Masada is right above the Dead Sea there in Israel. It's kind of neat that I've got to go there a couple times. And it has a long ways up on top of this mountain. You can climb up there, but it'd take a lot. So we didn't really climb up the mountain, but we went up by elevators. But when we got to the top, we ran down. And the next week, our legs hurt so bad from shin splints from running down that huge mountain at Masada. It's quite spectacular. So let's talk about Masada. But before Masada, we have to kind of tell you what was going on during the time of Jesus. You see, when Jesus lived, there were Jews that were called zealots. You take the word zeal, and OT means they were full of zeal. They were zealots. They were zealots because they wanted to overthrow Rome. They wanted to overthrow Roman rule, and they would try anything they could to do that. Now you can imagine Rome is huge, has huge armies, is now this huge empire. And of course, Israel was very tiny at the time, but their heart was that they thought the Messiah was coming to be a political Messiah, to be a military leader, and to free them of Roman rule. So when Jesus came, they were pretty disappointed. You can imagine. Well, the rebellions were very small at first, and so they would attack different groups of Roman soldiers, and you would see the rebellions happen, small attacks for small groups of zealots quite often. But then, as they gathered to get a bigger rebellion, things started coming together that weren't very good. But we'll get into that in just a little bit. I just wanted to focus too on Acts 5. Because in Acts 5, there was a guy named Gamaliel in the Bible. And he talked about two men that tried to lead a revolt. And these two men were considered rebels. So we see throughout the Bible, you see the zealots. And I also wanted to say, did you know this? Did you know that one of Jesus' disciples was a zealot? His name was Simon the Zealot. And he came to know the Lord, and he gave up his rebellion. And as he knew the Lord, he realized that our fight is in a different matter than the way he thought it was. But that is kind of neat, because Jesus drew from all different walks of life. Some were fishermen, some were tax collectors, on and on. Then we have a zealot in the midst. How cool is that? That came to the Lord. So we know that there was all these little rebellions going on when we go back to this. And we think in 66 AD, the zealots were trying to get together. That's after, Jesus was resurrected, and 66 years later, you can imagine, the zealots were trying to work together and getting together and to form a revolutionary government against Rome. And of course, Rome at that time had a Caesar. The Caesar was the Roman Caesar Nero. We know a lot about Nero, and he was very crazy, and he was very against Jews and Christians, and he persecuted the church, and he killed everyone around him, and he had Rome started on fire, and he fiddled while Rome burned. All these things about Nero. He was not really a good person, let's just say that. But he ordered the army to stop the revolt, and the soldier the leader of the army, the commander of the army, was named Vespasian. Well, Vespasian, we need to talk a little bit about him. He would lead this army into Galilee and control it. Okay, let's talk about Vespasian. Say Vespasian, General Vespasian. His name wasn't Vespasian before. I didn't even know this, but this is something that you guys need to know. Vespasian was Jewish, and he had turned Roman. So he was a Roman Jew. So here's what happens to this Roman Jew. His name was Joseph ben Matthias, and he was leader of the Jewish forces in Galilee. But then in Galilee, after Rome started conquering him, he began to admire the Romans, and he liked their system. So, and he knew the Jews didn't have a chance at all. So he said, I might as well go on to Rome. So he surrendered to Rome, and was taken as a Roman prisoner. As a prisoner, can you imagine that? And now he supported Rome now. So he gained his freedom from as a prisoner, and he sided with Rome. And so what happens then? He changed his name to Flavius Joseph Vespasian. Flavius Joseph, a Roman name, and he was Jewish. So here's a Jewish man, a Jewish leader, in fact, turning tide and going Roman and taking over Rome. In 70 AD, Vespasian, this Jewish guy, becomes emperor of Rome. Can you believe that? After Nero, he becomes emperor, and his son, Titus, leads the Roman army to invade Israel. Titus and Vespasian, they're really pretty anti-Israel. In fact, Titus attacks. We know that attacks. He's the one that attacks the temple. Titus is known for how much he really hates the Jews, even though, can you imagine, he is Jewish, or he is of Jewish descent, I should say. Titus conquers Jerusalem and destroys the temple, just like Jesus had told that would happen, predicted what had happened. Not one stone was left upon another stone. Sad thing. The temple's destroyed, Jerusalem's destroyed. Titus even destroys the trees and salts the earth so they can't even plant food. Can you imagine? It's a terrible, and it remained that way for many, many, many centuries. Centuries, not just years, but centuries. And in 81 AD, the Romans built a huge marble arch there to commemorate what Titus did to the Jews. How sad is that? And much of the booty, they took much of the wealth from the temple, all around the place, and all the people and everything, and they took them, a lot of them slaves. They also used them for slave labor and took the money to build the Roman Colosseum, where they have the gladiator fights, that big Colosseum in Rome. I think there's a picture of that in your book. That's what they used it for. So Jerusalem is no more until later on we know that Jerusalem will be revived, in 1948, 1967, but we won't get into that. Well, let's talk about the fortress Masada. The fortress Masada, when during the destruction of Jerusalem, the Jewish rebellion sent 1,000 committed revolutionaries, these were zealots, to hide out there in Masada. And it was near the Dead Sea. Well, let's talk about what the history of Masada is. There was a mountain there on top of this huge mountain. They call Masada Mountain now. It's 1,424 feet above the Dead Sea. But remember, the Dead Sea is way below sea level. So it's a pretty high mountain. The top is 18 acres and it's shaped like a diamond. And climbing it is pretty difficult to even climb up. I'm glad I didn't do it that time. I don't think I would have made it. Anyway, about 100 years before Christ, there was a revolt called the Maccabean Revolt. And we went around that where the Jews were revolting against, at that time was the generals and Alexander's generals. And at that time, basically took over for a while their freedom, and they call it Hanukkah. Now, I'm not going to get into Hanukkah, but that was 100 years. But they built this fortress so that they could hide out. It was just a small fortress then. And then Herod the Great saw this area and thought, oh, I am going to build something here. Oh, excuse me. And so he builds an elaborate structure, a palace on top of that mountain. He wants this mountain here, Masada, to be his palace so that he could go there and he could hide out and it'd be a good place for a fortress in case somebody wanted to attack him. Herod was kind of paranoid that anybody could attack him at any time. So let's talk about his building project here. Well, there was a wall and 3 gates, many towers surrounding the whole main compound. Huge cisterns of water would hold 200,000 gallons of water, of rainwater. And then they had beautiful aqueducts coming from those areas of rainwater and bringing more water in. So they had water up there. They had long storehouses full of oil, wine, grain, and supplies, and elaborate bathhouse, huge with actually a heated floor. They call it hypocaust, with a heated floor. And the bathhouse was on pillars. Pretty spectacular. The fortress had living quarters in it. And then in the next building, a wall separated the fortress from Herod's palace. And then Herod's palace was 3 levels, all having a breathtaking view. When you stand up there, you can see all over. The stairs were cut into the rock, and the top of the living quarters was where elaborate mosaics would be. It was most spectacular penthouse area for the king. The 2 lower layers had big courtyards too. Very spectacular palace. And then there was a separate western palace. At the western palace, it was about an acre. It was about an acre in width and length. The whole thing was about an acre. And the engineering was so amazing there. There was like these it's a beautiful remote location, but they would use this center too for the administrative center so they could administer. So Herod has a place to bring his royal people to help him, his whole crew there. That was in the separate Western Palace. And then the synagogue. They had a synagogue for worshiping there even. Like I said, the whole thing was such amazing engineering. And they had to use hard labor, and they knew that it had to be this remote location. Those are the important things. Amazing engineering, hard labor, and a remote location. So Herod dies in 4 BC. We think it's 4 BC to 1 BC, right around that time that Herod dies. Excuse me. A group of zealots come in 66 AD, and they're called Sicarii. And they come to the fortress then, and they take over, because Rome has taken over the fortress from Herod now. And so then they take over the fortress. And when they take over the fortress, they have control. The zealots have control of the fortress. And after the fall of Jerusalem, like I said, when Titus attacks Jerusalem, the 960 Jewish men, women, and children take refuge at Masada. Now, this is the saddest part. I don't even like to hardly go into it because it kind of just, makes me sad. So they were zealots, and they were hiding out there. And the final siege happened, and Josephus, the historian, records all that happened there. So it's the only written record we have of Masada. But the Jews held out. It was 73 AD, and there was a force about 15,000 Roman troops under the command of Flavius Silva. And he was the governor of Judea. And so he set out to get these Jews. And so he set up a base at the foot of the mountain, and then he built a ramp all the way up the side of the mountain to the top of Masada. And then he would attack the fort with a battering ram. It was so terrible. And as he was attacking inside, Eliezer ben Jair was the leader there. And he gave this stirring speech. And he said they preferred death before slavery. They knew the Romans would come and just try to tear them apart. The sad thing, the Romans came, and as they came in, they found that they had all died. All died except for 2 women and 5 children, and they were in a water pipe hiding to tell what had happened. And Josephus must have got his information from there. But what they said, basically said, is they would rather die than be taken by Rome. And that's just what happened. It's such a heart-wrenching thing, I know. And so when I go there, it's kind of sad, And they were zealots. They were zealots. They were rebels. The whole group was rebels, so they would have been probably put to death. But now we always hear the Jews say, remember Masada, never again.